and welcome to the Sunday Morning Linux Review. This is episode 326.
We don't have a title.
Yeah,
that is the title. We don't have. This is the first reboot. How's that?
Right.
First reboot.
That's right. And this is Tony Bemis,
Tom Lawrence,
and Jay LaCroix.
If we say something interesting during the show, that'll become the title. I actually like the way it's done on some other podcasts where somewhere along the line a phrase is said and that's how you have the title, because we're not doing it live, so we don't have to have a title before we start.
Right.
That's true.
Sounds good. All right. So it's been a little bit longer than we wanted to between recording the shows, but we are back. It's the last day of February. And
wait, there's not 29 this year?
Nope.
Time flies. Wow.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, what's going on with you guys? We're talking about projects and stuff.
Well, I don't mind starting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just volunteered.
Yeah, why not? There's 3 things I've been working on. One of them is a little less open source. I have done a series of Synology videos, and that's one of those mixed ones. Technically, Synology is based on Linux, but it's not a fully open source, but it does run Docker and you can run lots of open source things on it. It does have virtualization. You can run open source things there. So I'll talk a little bit less about Synology, but I will dive right into the new version of pfSense. That has been a lot of fun. The version 2.5, I've been slowly rolling it out here and there. We're probably this coming week going to roll it out to more of our clients. It's only been out for a week, but there was a couple issues that came up with like Unbound and a couple minor quirks, which is always what's going to happen. No matter how much you test a product before release, once it hits the real world, someone always configures it in a way that the developers did not see coming. They're like, you do what? And why is it crashing? So that's been a little bit of not too rough of a road. There was one ARM CPU problem that they ran into, but overall the roll has been smooth. And of course, the exciting part, if you're not familiar with the pfSense firewall, the exciting part is they now integrate the WireGuard VPN. And so I've done a series of videos on that. I have a love-hate relationship still with WireGuard. I like it. I think, Tony, you've tested it in the past. Am I correct?
Yeah, we did some simple testing just between a static server and my laptop and Phil's laptop. And we were able to communicate back and forth across the VPN.
The challenge with WireGuard is everyone's so happy about it being such a quiet protocol. That also means if you send a malformed packet to it or a packet that doesn't have the right security settings in it, it doesn't tell you. It just doesn't pass traffic, but it doesn't tell you why it's not passing traffic, leaving it up to you to spend hours figuring it out. So that's been a little bit of a challenge. And I think I'm going to open a ticket eventually with the pfSense engineers. And I know some of them directly, so I may just reach out directly to them and say, before I duplicate work and trying to find a ticket that matches what I'm trying to phrase, essentially there's a level of input validation that I feel needs to be added to the system. One of the things that pfSense I learned will let you do is the way WireGuard works. You have the main WireGuard tunnel and you set up a series of peers. The peers shouldn't overlap on their networks, but they can. There's use cases for it, but it doesn't validate when you have overlapping peers. And if you have overlapping peers, the first peer works and every overlapped peer in the network range won't work subsequently after that. So there's been some little nuance for when you set up a site to site, it works all the time. But when you're doing a site to multi-site or multiple peers, there's a lot of little stuff you have to deal with. It's making, and Tony's got a background in network engineering, so he understands where each subnet can't step on the other subnet, or you just don't know where to route things. And
exactly.
So you're actually dealing with a whole routing problem. Now, this is also different for VPN people who have used things like OpenVPN in the past, because they're used to the client server concept under OpenVPN or several other VPN servers. WireGuard is much more like IPsec, where neither side is a server. Both sides are just one side of the tunnel. So there's a symmetry to the tunnel you create where what is the peer on one side is the server on the other side and inverted on each side. So even your phone running WireGuard, you're not loading a WireGuard client on your phone necessarily. You're running the WireGuard server on your phone. It's just really in how you treat the routing and flow of packets. Because generally speaking, when you add a peer such as your phone, you don't necessarily want the WireGuard server communicating back to your phone in the same way like you would do it for a site-to-site. There's nothing besides the WireGuard IP tunnel IP itself that you need to get to. So explaining all that nuance in a series of videos has been me recording a video twice to get the tutorial out there to make sure people have a good, clear understanding of exactly how to do it. But I've done it, and I've done like so far 2 videos. I probably have to do 1 more. Now, I actually did, prior to me doing these videos, I did a video that I can just have a reply to because I knew the question was going to come up. One of the things about the way WireGuard works, the beauty of WireGuard and why people like it is they go, oh, wow, it's a simple protocol. I feel as though WireGuard cheated, and so to speak, to call it a simple protocol. If you look at something like OpenVPN, it has entire facilities for integration for such things as 2-factor, as username, as password, and there's even ways to tie it into federated authentication servers such as Active Directory. WireGuard says we don't have usernames and passwords. That's not our problem. So it is a lightweight protocol. It doesn't have as many lines of code, but it also only supports a single cipher and has no concept of a username and password. They're like, that's not our problem. That is for someone else to engineer. So there's a lot of code that isn't in there, and sometimes is much, how kind of there's a lot of excitement when a new product comes out. And everyone gets excited thinking it will replace some other product because it's faster, therefore it must be better. It has a, even Linus Torvalds himself was kind of admiring the code and how efficient it was. So that means it's just going to replace OpenVPN everywhere. And it's quickly realizing to people that it's not. It's going to be very slowly adopted. It'll be probably quickly adopted in site-to-site tunnels where it's kind of an easy drop in, but for general usage, as anyone who's worked in corporate with large VPNs, you can't just rely on some, arbitrary keys being generated each time for each user. You need actual passwords. You need it tied to their whatever their authentication server on the back end is, so you can keep track of all these users and where they're going. You also have to manually assign every IP address internally and externally to it. There's no concept of DHCP or just handing from a pool. That doesn't happen that way because prior to the connection, the endpoints have to know their IP addresses prior, so they can't get assigned dynamically. Well, not easily. You could build a third-party service, but once again, now you've gone outside of WireGuard. All of this nuance has led to lots of time being sunk into this project to try to make sure I can be as clear as possible with my tutorials on it, while also making sure my staff understands it top to bottom, because immediately as soon as pfSense 2.5 is released, the request and part of what we do as a business is helping companies get things set up. The requests are flying in for helping WireGuard.
Really? Wow.
It does have a speed advantage over IPsec for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that makes sense. But I was, for some reason, I thought your like core customers would do more of like what do you call it? Where they're like their laptop trying to connect in, instead of site to site.
So we have two sets of customers essentially. We have all the OpenVPN that's not changing at all, that we are going to keep running. That's all the like business customers we have where we maintain our business. A big expansion we've done over the last year, and actually it's fair enough because me and Tony have not really hung out and just kind of talked in person for a little while. A lot of what my company's shifted to over the last year, dramatically so, is doing consulting work, and so other IT companies or even managed service providers call us to help deploy things. So we've now been doing consulting literally around the world. We got companies in the Netherlands, France, England. We have a couple big ones in England now that I just love the guy's accent. We almost want to talk to him when he calls because he's got the thickest accent, and he's got a cat that he he yells profanities in his English way occasionally. So it makes it wonderful to listen to him. It's really fun. But yeah, we have a lot of clients and we help them set some of these things up. So as they are moving and doing different deployments, that kind of consulting, that's kind of a growth of my business from YouTube to offer that type of consulting work, because people say, hey, I'd like to hire you for a project. So we kind of shifted our YouTube around to allow people to easily interact and hire us. And it's all stuff we can completely do remotely. So it fit really well into the events of 2020.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah. The other little bit of a side project is diving more and more into XCP-ng and playing around with it. I've talked about the project. I kind of want to do a next series of where this is used in corporate America. And even Jay has talked about considering trying it out over Proxmox when it comes to doing some of the, using it as a hypervisor. And for those of you, little background, XCP-ng is actually a open source spin of the Zen server. Citrix Zen server was really popular for a while. Citrix made some missteps, and those missteps made by Citrix to just do some really lousy way they treated their customers, got a Kickstarter going with a group of people with a programming company called Vates. Vates did this Kickstarter. It got more than double the funding they were looking for. So many people donated to the project, and the XCP-ng open source hypervisor was born, and it really does compete at a high level at places like VMware. Citrix Zen server, is more popular than people realize at large scale hosting companies. And Phil, who's been on this podcast for a while, he's taking a break right now. For those who are wondering what happened to Phil, doing the family thing and learning all the troubles and tribulations that come with starting a family and having a new baby. So he's taking a break right now for other commitments, but Phil has dealt with it at large scale as well. So all these companies are now switching to XCP-ng because it's a drop-in replacement for Citrix without all the headache of dealing with Citrix. So I've been doing a few more projects on that and showing just how scalable it is into thousands of servers running and stuff. So that's been my other project. So those are the things I've been working on for the last couple of months. And anyone who follows me on YouTube kind of knows it, because there's just kind of a lot of drops of videos. And of course, the videos coming up, the next project is going to be, I have a 45 drives storinator in my office with 420 terabytes of storage in it. 30 hard drives, and those were going to be the next set of videos running Ubuntu with ZFS.
Ooh, that has me excited, actually.
Yeah, I'm going to let, if you're interested, you'll be able to remote in and take a look at it if you want, because it's going to be in the lab set up for doing testing. So
yes, please, let's talk.
Yeah, that's going to be cool. Those projects haven't started. My engagement with 45 drives has been really fun. They customized the server. They built it all. They put my logo on it and sent it to me. Now it's shipped with Fedora. And of course, we've mentioned before, I think in December when we did our last podcast, the incident with Fedora and how they're changing things with CentOS and everything else. So now that all those changes, they decided, we don't really want to depend on Red Hat and some of their issues. And so 45 drives is shifting to ramp up their Ubuntu base OS. 45 drives is interesting. And I think one of the reasons they're reaching out to me as a channel is they want to talk about some of the really high-end solutions they provide around things like Ceph and Gluster and really large scale scalable storage. So that'll be some of what the videos are focused on, but it'll be fun for doing other projects as well. And if you don't know what 45 drives looks like, check it out at 45drives.com and check out Backblaze, who uses a lot of their chassis for enterprise storage. But that's me since December.
Yeah.
That's all?
Well, there's probably a few other things scattered around. Something SolarWinds. That's not really a Linux or open source, but yes, I've done a series of videos on SolarWinds to try to break down the timeline and confusion of all that. But I won't get too off topic on that. Everyone knows that the SolarWinds event happened. I mean, how often does a company end up in Senate hearings that wasn't about social media stealing your data?
Right.
Actually, I have a feeling companies like Facebook, like, oh, good, it's you guys now. They're not worried about us anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, the focus sure has shifted.
Mm-hmm. Mark Zuckerberg, who? They're not worried about him. They're grilling CEOs of Microsoft, FireEye, and SolarWinds. They were all in the hot seat last Tuesday, I think it was, when the Sunday hearings were done. I actually took the time to watch them to create my videos. So, like I said, I won't get too far off topic, but I do have an entire deep dive I do into it, including my aggravation. For those of you that aren't familiar with this, Microsoft decided to call the event different than the other cybersecurity companies. And they make a note in their reports like, oh, other companies called this, but we called it that, just to clear things up, because we needed to muddy the waters and cause people to ask, why are there two different names for what seems to be the same breach? Because Microsoft.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's life. Tony knows about that. He works a little bit in security doing some of the things you do. So
Oh yeah. Yeah. We're not getting into this because it's not like DDoS related, but
yeah.
it is something interesting. I was listening to the Risky Business podcast
Oh, yeah.
today.
Yep.
They were talking a little bit about it on the last episode, but what was interesting is that there's all these other attacks or hacks that's being investigated right now that uses similar techniques, and so they're calling it all these other attacks. They're calling it the SolarWinds, SolarGate thing
Yeah.
also, but which really isn't related to SolarWinds yet, because it's a similar technique. They're still like calling it the SolarGate.
Yes, that it is really adding confusion to everything that goes on in that space. It can be challenging, and I get it that a lot of people want more news on it because they've asked me to kind of cover it. I do it in sections because I don't look at myself as a news channel. I find this to be an interesting enough attack that I took the time to put together a deep dive on it. But it's still a lot, and it's kind of a natural evolution when a security researcher, they want to publish interesting work. And so the more they dive into poking at even the SolarWinds product, there's 3 more hacks unrelated in any way because they were never used in the wild, but there were more flaws found in the SolarWinds Orion product line. So that, of course, created more confusion. People like, oh, someone found another exploit. Yeah, but it had nothing to do with being used. It's just the fact that SolarWinds, everyone wants to vet it right now. So let's go through and vet the product. And why not? Because if you say SolarWinds and you're a security research company, the news picks it up and starts talking to you. So the cycle continues.
Oh yeah.
So what Linux related things have you been doing, Tony?
Oh, I've been doing a lot of little projects around the house, but doing simple Raspberry Pi projects. So I wanted to expand or replace my offsite backups. So I did 2 of these. I got a Raspberry Pi 4 with 8 gig and a 8 terabyte drive. And I took some Velcro, some like double-sided tape Velcroed the Raspberry Pi on one side, power bricks on the other with like an extension cord. And then you got a wireless backup. So I convinced my in-laws to let me put one there. And then my sister on the other side of the state, I put one at her house too. And so I have some offsite backups of my FreeNAS now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And I said it's simple. It's because there's nothing really to install other than setting up like SSH keys, and everything. The FreeNAS backup I'm doing is rsync. So it's just, make sure connect SSH to the box and you're good to go.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I set up to secure the SSH connection. I set up fail to ban, and I love that program.
Yeah. Fail to ban is great.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. And I've been watching the logs for it, and it's showing like so many, I think in the first 2 weeks I had it running, it banned over 300 IPs.
I'll look it up and send to you afterwards because I can't remember the name right now. because I have it bookmarked oddly at my office, but not here for weird reasons. But there's an updated version. Someone took fail to ban and enhanced it with some intelligence where it shares with other servers. If I find that project, I think I have it, as I want to do a video on it because it looks really interesting, but I haven't had a chance to play it. I'll send it to you in case you want to play with it. It's the concept of taking fail to ban to the next level and going, we know these IPs are bad, so it can pull in feeds to pre-ban lots of common threats that are seen.
Yeah. That's
Great
really
idea.
neat. That's actually built into a fail to ban to be able to pull other blacklists and stuff.
Okay.
But I'm sure they put some integration in with actual feeds out there available, because it just has like a line. Do you want to enable this? Yes. And then what's the URL?
Yeah, this had some. That's what it caught me. It's like I bookmarked it, and I didn't really bookmark it. I stuck it in a tab, and I said, "I'm going to look at this." And when you said the fail to ban, I'm like, "That's still in a tab pinned from about a month ago."
Oh yeah,
because I got tied up with these other projects and just said, I see that pinned tab. I'm like, that looks like a thing I should play with.
Right. What's also cool about it is you can have it, instead of just writing a a firewall rule on your local machine, you can have it run commands. So you could probably have it do an SSH connection over to like your border firewall and ban the IP from there also, which is neat. And so there's so much extension that's available to it. And what I really like about it is just how simple it is. That all it does is it watches your logs of your authentication logs, whether it's anything you're running. So SSH is by default, but you can have it watch your HTTP logs, and whenever it sees banned or failed logins there, it can start banning those IPs, and it's just really cool.
Nice. Kind of related, have you watched any of or read any of his blog posts by Jeff Geerling, Geerling, on building his Raspberry Pi SATA RAIDs?
He is so great.
I haven't.
He's got some really good write-ups and videos to go with them. I like the way he does both. He does, because I prefer actually to read. As much as I produce YouTube content, I prefer to read it. But he's got a whole series on building SATA RAID with controller cards that have SATA ports on it that plug into Raspberries with Raspberry Pi compute modules. So yeah, he builds some pretty slick RAID servers that it's been impressive. That are all, you have standard SATA interface. He even has dock interfaces and cool builds, but it's all related to tying them together to build them on Raspberry Pi. So it might be a neat way to extend your product, because he has all the links to all the hardware you need to build that out. So it's still the Raspberry Pi, but a step further with like 4 hard drives plugged into it. They're all SATA.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they're all Raspberry Pi NAS systems. If you type in Raspberry Pi RAID, he's now the first result, because he's done a whole series on these. It's been great.
Yeah, that's cool. And then the other thing I've been working on is setting up little security cameras around my house. So I'm doing that with Raspberry Pi Zeros, and then one of those I found some cameras online on Amazon that has the IR and has automatic IR cut filter cut. Yeah, so as soon as it gets dark, then it'll change the filter on the lens to go to IR, and then have the IR LEDs running, and yeah, it's really convenient. So I have that. I have one set up in my garage. I was trying to set one up for outside, but those IR LEDs are fairly short range.
Yeah.
So you only get the person when they're like, within 10 feet of you or whatever.
That's what I used before for my Raspberry Pi sump pump camera. Was I used Motion Eye with one of those IR cameras, so I could watch my sump pump in the dark to make sure it didn't overflow.
Oh yeah, and that's exactly what I'm using is Motion Eye.
Yep, Motion Eye is great for that. That is a wonderful project.
Yeah, I really like it. Although now that I'm adding more Raspberry Pis to it, then I'm going to use Motion Eye as the OS on the Pi, just to get the web feed out, or the video feed. And then I'm debating on what program to run on my on a server where I can have like 5 or 6 feeds come in.
Well, it turns out if you do a little reading on this, you'll find, and I haven't tested this, but I noticed part of what is the repository for TrueNAS now is MotionEye. And it will run MotionEye inside of a FreeBSD jail that will pull all the feeds from all your cameras. And of course, the fact that it runs on TrueNAS means you have a place to store everything. So you can have it be the central feed. It's fast enough. You use your Raspberry Pi Zeros just to create some data and send it back. And then the TrueNAS server can collect it and have the storage to be able to, archive everything.
Nice. I was trying to look that up to see if there was a jail for it. I tried creating my own jail with Motion, and because everything I looked up for MotionEye, that there was no like BSD port for it.
Yeah, I haven't. That's what I thought was weird too. When I seen it pop up in the jail list, I'm like, that's neat that it's in the jail list, but I didn't realize. I thought it was always an ARM compiled thing. So it's been on one of those. I want to build a squirrel camera because we have squirrels in the backyard, and my wife thinks it's weird that I just kind of watch them. But it's been nice in the morning. I have my coffee and I watch the squirrels. So I said, I kind of want a squirrel cam. So I put a feeder out there, and it seems like that would be an entertaining thing for me to watch the squirrels eat the food. So I don't need a night vision one because they're daytime animals. But I thought it'd be kind of cool to archive all my squirrel footage.
Yeah, very cool.
We actually have a squirrel feeder in our yard too. It's actually for birds, but this one squirrel in particular, who's kind of overweight, just decides to cram himself into the bird feeder and eat all of the bird seed, like all of it, as in like ate all the bird seed out of the bird feeder and then tore into the bag of bird seed and ate that too.
Oh man.
I know, it was a cute squirrel, but oh my God, ate me out of the bird seed.
Yeah, I bought a giant bag of corn because it's cheap and the squirrels like it, and I can afford to feed them that way.
Yeah, cool. But that's about it for what I've been doing.
So Jay.
Gosh, I don't even know where to begin. Because as I, before we started recording, I'm like, I don't really think I have all that much. But then when you guys are talking, you reminded me of everything that's happened. So I guess I do have a few things. So one of which has been, every now and then I go through my Homelab, my servers, networks, and things, and just try to configure everything, maybe find a better way to do things, faster way to do things. So in pfSense, I did a number of changes, and Tom's probably snickering because he helped me actually fix one, but he actually was moral support and was there when I found the problem, which was a rogue DNS server, and it was a rogue DNS server because I put it there and forgot I did. But other than that weird problem that took me way too long to figure out than I'd like to admit, I enabled DNSSEC. That's something I've been wanting to do for a while, and PF blocker, which I finally got around to doing. And I'm having a few issues though, like with DNSSEC. I think my problem might be related to the new version of pfSense, but I haven't been able to prove that yet. I did find a forum post where some people are complaining about SSL errors on DNSSEC. And when I first started looking into it, I found that I have to have a specific host name for the DNS to work, which I did fix. That resolved like 95% of it. But there's still a few sites out there that'll just give me an SSL error. And I was just Googling around and I found a Reddit post with, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 people complaining about this on the latest version of pfSense. So either that means we all did the same wrong thing when we set it up, or there's an actual problem. I don't know which quite yet. So that was my adventure with pfSense, which is kind of still going on. And I started getting into Home Assistant very heavily, which I've had for over a year. But it's just one of those things that's on my network that I set up once and I kind of moved on to other things. But lately I'm like, oh, it's all of a sudden time to get back into that again. And I did, and I've just been configuring Home Assistant and getting kind of obsessed with it. And for those of you out there listening that have no idea what the heck I'm talking about, Home Assistant is a application, or it's also an operating system. There's 2 versions. There's an operating system you can get to run on your Pi, or you could just install it. And it's for, well, as the name would imply, Home Assistant. It's for IoT type things for your smart cameras. Well, maybe not so much smart cameras, but like switches and and all that fun stuff. You could use it to turn on your TVs, your smart bulbs, smart switches, and things like that. It has a web interface, so you can log in. It can there's an app for your phone too that you can use that could tie into. And I've been just configuring the heck out of it and having a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, it's the replacement for the gateway box that all these different IoT devices have that you can buy for them.
Yep.
So so like if you have a separate box for like Hughes, and then somebody will have a separate box for what Blink cameras or things like that, you can use Home Assistant to tie all those together in one box.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And I like the fact that it has a bunch of different integrations, is what they call it, because even if you have a proprietary system, and let's face it, who has the money to just replace all their things just because they decided that, maybe I shouldn't have gone with a proprietary solution. I had some proprietary smart plugs, which I'll get to a funny story in a moment. But what I could do is integrate those directly into it. There's a integration with Roku, so you can put your Rokus on this. It could even show what's being watched on the TV. I don't know why I need to know that, but you can do it. And you could do Wake on LAN with this to turn on things that can receive a Wake on LAN packet, for example. There's so many different things that you can tie into this thing. Like, it's literally watching the power usage of my turtle tank filters. I'm not even kidding. It's to that level. So I know how much power usage everything that uses a lot of power you can use. It also, speaking of my turtle tanks, it turns on their basking lights and turns them off during this appropriate time. I have the lamps in the living room synchronized to sunset. So whenever it's sunset, which obviously the time of sunset changes throughout the year, it's going to turn on the lights in the living room as soon as it starts to be, sunset. And then I tell it to cut those out at about 11:30. Nobody's up at that point. So I take care of that. I have it able to toggle my recording lights for the YouTube studio side of things. So I'm really going into this. It's this rabbit hole of fun that when you first start using it, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. But then when you see all the different things you can do, it's crazy. But it's also a learning curve, not because it's hard. It's actually kind of on the easy side, in my opinion, but it's just that the way that you do things in Home Assistant is not like the way you'd think they'd be done in any other user interface. It's a great interface. It's just different. And once you learn the difference, it's not like you have to learn anything on a coding level or anything like that, but they just have things in an interesting place. But it makes sense once you get the hang of it. So I've been really getting into that. And it led to the most annoying network situation that I've ever had in my entire career.
Really?
And so I'm sitting down with my kids, and, I have a PS5 because for some reason I managed to snag one back in December when they were really hard to get. So, which is cool. I have a PS5.
Yeah.
So it's time to play the PlayStation 5. So I sit down, I turn it on, we get to the title screen, and it cuts off. I'm like, what? What's going on? Turn it back on, get to the title screen, it cuts off. Then the TV cuts off. I turn the TV on, my server rack goes out. I'm like, what's going on? So I turn on the server rack. And then my studio PC UPS starts beeping at me. My desktop UPS starts beeping at me. Both of them are not connected, but then they are, and then they stop beeping at me. I try to turn on another TV, that goes off. The LED lights in my office go off. I turn them back on. 5 minutes later, they go off. And I'm just trying to sit. I'm just trying to sit down and play a game. That's all I want to do. I want to have a half an hour. I just want to play some games with the kids. And I just keep trying to get to the title screen, and it's like the PlayStation just keeps getting cut off. So I have to wait through a file system check because it's like the power got yanked. So what I found out, this is hilarious. So I decided to flash the firmware of all my smart plugs, which went fine. I tested it, and it works as intended. I can toggle it on and off. I left it on for a few hours, no problems. So then I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't update the smart plug that my internet equipment is on. I have a power strip that's connected to a smart plug, and attached to that power strip is my pfSense firewall, my cable modem, and the Unify switch that powers all my Wi-Fi access points over power over Ethernet. So I flashed that smart plug, and it's fine. I wait like 30 minutes. It's fine. So okay, it's time to go grab dinner. I come back down, and that's when all that started to happen. And then I realized when you flash the firmware, it defaults to off. So as soon as I flashed the firmware of the smart plug to the internet devices, it actually cut that off. I didn't hear the beeping. So my UPS was draining because I have all that in a UPS.
Oh.
So once the UPS gets empty, then the Wi-Fi access points cut out, pfSense cuts out, cable modem cuts out. And what I found out is that when you use open source firmware on the smart plugs, if they don't have an internet connection, they have this thing where they power cycle. And they power cycle in an attempt to reconnect to a Wi-Fi access point. It's kind of like one of those things like if you don't have a route to the internet and it can't repair itself, it's just going to reboot. It's a default setting in the firmware. So the smart plugs kept cutting out and turning back on. So every time they power cycled, whatever's attached to them, the power gets cut and then it comes back. Now, I will say it's really hard to connect a Home Assistant to fix the problem when your networking doesn't work. Now think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
This whole situation cuts out all your internet devices, but you need to get access to your Home Assistant server to fix it, but you have no internet access.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, I go into the closet once I figured it out, and I press the button on the smart plug, which of course restores power to the UPS, and immediately pfSense comes online, and the Unify switch comes up, and everything starts to work again. But I was just like getting very annoyed. It was actually kind of funny now that I think about it. But I guess it does teach you a lesson when you want to, integrate Wi-Fi into all the things. You're actually integrating Wi-Fi into all the things, and you're kind of at its mercy at that point. So just keep that in mind. It was kind of funny, but really frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really cool. And I don't know if I'd want to put a smart plug on, put my internet stuff on a smart plug, but it does make sense if you want to be able to monitor how much power it's using.
That's exactly why I did it. Originally, when I first started, I used to have, when I first started, like way back when cable modems are kind of brand new, Comcast would always tell you reboot it. Anytime you have a problem, they tell you to reset your modem, which I think is mostly BS. But anyway, I just had a power strip, and I would just flick the button, cut the power, turn it back on. That way, if anyone in my house, if I wasn't home, is having trouble with the internet, I'd just say, just cut the power to the power strip and press the button. It'll come back on. Causes everything attached to it to reboot. I don't really feel there's any use to do that, but then I am monitoring power usage. That's been a kind of a big thing for me. And that is actually why I have the smart plug. Thankfully, there's a setting you can basically make it default on, and that never happens. And you could also make it not cut the power to basically anything. You could do like more of a soft reboot instead of like a full-on like abrupt reboot. Again, I knew I kind of brought it on myself when I decided to flash the firmware with open source firmware, but I decided randomly, hey, that's the thing I'm doing today. So that's the thing I did.
Yeah.
That was my random project of the day. It was fun though. Speaking of YouTube stuff, so I don't remember what all I mentioned last time, but I implemented new branding, like new intros and everything to my YouTube channel, learnlinux.tv, for those that don't already know. So I personally think it looks a lot more professional now with the intro and everything. I'm really pleased with the way that it turned out. New logo, new style. So I think that's pretty neat. And people seem to like it, so I'm pleased. And I'm actually in a room full of hardware to review. I'm going to probably do a lot of hardware related videos coming up. Maybe possibly more than normal because I have done this every now and then, but I have a pile of Raspberry Pi and Raspberry Pi related hardware unopened for videos. For example, power over Ethernet hats. I have those. I'm going to show those in a video. I have a tower rack case for the Pis. It's like 12 layers. So you could have 12 Raspberry Pis on this thing. So think about 12 Raspberry Pis with power over Ethernet hats attached to them. So I'm going to just make basically like a server rack. And for those of you that have seen my videos, you'll notice that there's glowing fans in the background inside the server rack. Those are Raspberry Pi cases. Those each have 4. And this is one of those, but it's a lot taller, and it has 12. So you could have 12 Raspberry Pis, or you could mount a couple SSDs into there. It doesn't have to be a Raspberry Pi at every layer. The power over Ethernet hats make it a lot cleaner, so you don't have wires everywhere. I bought some SSDs specifically for these, and then I also grabbed some Argon One Raspberry Pi cases. That's my current favorite standalone case that has a built-in mSATA SSD slot in the case. So you could attach an SSD to it. It's still at the mercy of USB with this case, unfortunately, but I'm going to be looking into setting that up, which already means RetroPie videos potentially, and a couple NAS videos for setting up like Open Media Vault. I'm probably going to do that too. And not to be undone, I have, Tom mentioned Synology. I have 2 boxes full of Synology stuff sent to me from them because they're actually thinking about sponsoring the channel. So they sent me like 8 terabytes worth of hard drives and a unit. So I have to get that out unboxed and review that. That's going to be fun. And I'm not done yet. I've been saving up for a new tower because I felt like video renders are taking a long time. And the upgrade to 4K has been kind of a pain for me. So I ordered a brand new Thelio from System 76, the Thelio Major, with 64 gigs of RAM. I forgot which NVIDIA card it is. It's not the top of the line, but it's decent. And a Threadripper CPU with a PCIe 4 storage of about 1 terabyte, I think is what I ordered it with. And with custom engraving on the front, which actually has my YouTube channel etched into the front of the tower. So I was saving up for a while. I was like, now it's time to do it.
That's
and
cool.
I did. It's going to be here on Tuesday, and I can't wait to see how fast that cuts through renders. And of course, I'm going to review that as well, probably do an unboxing. So I have a lot of work on my YouTube channel to do lately. So it's going to be a lot of hardware stuff, more than I normally do. I might do like one hardware video every other week or one a week at most, but it's like I have more hardware stacking up than I have time to review, which I guess is a good problem to have. And Tom mentioned XCP-ng, which, yep, that is true. I'm wanting to look into that. I don't know when I'm going to get to it now that I have all this stuff, but that's something Tom and I talk about a lot, XCP-ng and Proxmox. Proxmox is what I use, both our virtualization solutions. A little bit of background about that, though. I've been a Citrix user for quite a while. Early in my career, I was a system administrator for a company, and that's what they use. They use Citrix Zen Server. And coming from VMware, I loved it. It was just so much fun to work on. I looked forward to working on that every day. I felt like it gave you everything VMware gives you, but I can't really put it down to one thing. I just really liked the way that it was designed. I thought everything was very intelligent. It makes sense. I talked to support a number of times because the company had a contract with Citrix. I was pleased with the support on that. And I got kind of taken away from it because the job I had after that didn't use it. Then Tom turned me on to XCP-ng, and that being a drop-in replacement, I kind of think of it like LibreOffice, like what that is to OpenOffice. They both still exist, but LibreOffice, in my opinion, has succeeded OpenOffice in much the same way I think XCP-ng has succeeded Citrix proper. So that's just my opinion, though, but I really like it a lot. I went with Proxmox because it had built-in support for containers, which at the time XCP didn't have that. XCP-ng didn't have that exposed. But then again, I only run one container, so I guess that wasn't really a reason. But it was at the time. I kind of felt like I liked the fact that Proxmox gives you a selection. You want to create a new, do you want to create a VM? Do you want to create a container? You get to choose, and then they're both in the same interface, which I thought was really slick. And it's not that you can't do that in XCP-ng, it's just not baked in. And that was just the kind of like the coin toss, or the one thing that kind of made me go in the direction of Proxmox. But I've been kind of thinking that seems like XCP-ng has more momentum than Proxmox has in their development. It's a lot of exciting things happening there, and Proxmox is more status quo. So kind of like the exciting nature of XCP-ng, to be honest.
Well, they just announced too, I'm excited about this. I've had a problem with the way they run their backup servers. Now, it's not that they don't work well. I think they could work better. And they finally got to refactoring all the code, and it's going to have a series of individual backup jobs that will run simultaneously. It's really weird how they did didn't do the threading in it, because they just didn't expect people to be backing up that many servers at once. So it was never really an issue. And now that they have this full stack backup, they built two things. One's called a proxy backup, and I won't get too detailed what it means, but it's basically for remote administration backups. But they refactored all the code, and they said, well, we wrote it, let's integrate it into the main system. So there's a lot of new exciting things coming down the pipeline for XCP-ng. And like Jay said, they've been really on top of a lot of the cutting edge storage technologies for people who want to build some of the scalable SAN side of it. So if you have like extensive storage, going back to like the 45 drives, like I mentioned, Ceph and Gluster, they're building a lot more support for Ceph and Gluster, because when you're building out 1,000 virtual machines, you've got to have a very reliable storage source. So they're building a lot more on the back end of that to really scale that up.
And one thing about that is, when I was working at that company, at the time I was like, wow, I like this Citrix solution so much that I want to run it at home. I want to run this. And then I'm like, oh, it costs what? Oh, yeah. I all of a sudden don't want to run it at home anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, they made it so that it was free. You just have to pay for the support. And my understanding is they changed that yet again later. But then when I found out XCP-ng was like the drop-in replacement of Citrix, it got me really excited. I'm like, I could actually relive those fond memories of when I was supporting that system back then, and I could actually use it now. But what really made me look at it, because Tom and I have been thinking about this for a while and talking about this for a while, but it's actually coming up for renewal, because I did buy support for Proxmox. And now that it's coming up for renewal, I'm like, maybe I might want to try something else just to see if I still want to keep going that direction, or if I want to go a different direction. Maybe I should set it up in my lab and just figure out which one I truly like between the two. Because before I pay for Proxmox, I want to know that, is XCP-ng better for me? I don't know. Maybe it's worth a shot.
Yeah. And a fun little tidbit of history is the core project itself, the Xen hypervisor, which has been in the Linux kernel for a long time as far as integration and support. That actually dates back to its initial release from October of 2003. It's actually one of the original popular hypervisor project, and still runs, to my knowledge, that hypervisor, not XCP-ng, because XCP-ng is based on the Xen hypervisor, but it still runs most of the workloads inside of the Amazon servers.
I got a little familiar with Xen. I'm not as familiar with it, but I had a coworker, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. He works at Red Hat now, which I can understand why they snagged him up. But I worked at that company. I go over to his desk, and he had, it looked like OpenBox, just a window manager, so nothing out of the ordinary. But when I got talking to him, and this is before Qubes OS, either before Qubes OS, which is a distribution of Linux that is heavily focused on compartmentalizing all the different applications into different virtual machines. But he basically rolled his own. Like, his way of using his desktop was he was running Xen on that computer, and he was doing some kind of either X window forwarding or SSH X forwarding of some kind, that where he had all his applications running in different VMs, but he would forward it to the same GUI so that they show up on his monitor as if it's all the same distribution. And he did it himself. And I saw this and I was just so blown away. I'm like, oh my God, this is just genius and time consuming and probably, tedious to set up. But he did it, and it was just one of the most fascinating desktop Linux installs I've ever seen. But it was awesome. And I looked at it then, I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I didn't know you could do all that. So then I started looking more into Xen server and whatnot at that time as well. So there's a lot of exciting technologies out there and clever ways to use it.
Yeah, and Qubes still to this day runs based on the Xen kernel as its core.
You know, I get a lot of review or, requests for reviews of Qubes, and I started to actually work on a review, and the review was so negative, I didn't even want to upload it, and I didn't
It's
because,
challenging.
well, it wasn't so much that it was challenging because I do understand that with something like that, you're gonna have a higher barrier of entry. But it's actually Phil and I were working on it. He he was thinking about buying a computer. I forgot what kind it was, but it was a model that I had, and it wasn't even the newest thing out. It was, maybe a year old ish, I'm guessing, or the chipset was a year old. Qubes OS would not run on it at all. And I tried it on an older computer of mine, still wouldn't run. And I'm like, so I have to run a computer that's 2 or 3 years old just to run Qubes OS because the kernel and driver stack is from a very, very old Fedora version that's probably like 5 or 6 versions behind. And they think that's okay for desktops. Like, you have to have an old computer. Like, what are they doing? Because usually, I don't care how good you are with Linux, you generally want networking, I assume, but that's impossible on all the hardware that I had, unless I wanted to custom compile a kernel module of some kind. And at that point, I just gave up on it because I don't mind it being hard. I mean, keep in mind, I can run Arch Linux, and I actually probably have the install process memorized by now. But that to me just really turned me off. And I just said, this just isn't something I want to review because what am I going to say? I tried for 5 hours to get it working and I couldn't. No, I don't think I want to do that because then people are going to be upset with me for talking down on it, which they probably are now, to be honest, now that they've heard it in the podcast. But in all seriousness, that really didn't work out for me. Maybe it's better now. I mean, that was over a year ago, so maybe it's not a problem anymore. But speaking of difficult installations, on Wednesday, I have the longest Arch Linux video I've ever done that's going to be uploaded on Wednesday. It's 2 or just shy of 2 hours long, and it shows you how to do 3 different types of installations. It's basically a refresh of the Arch Linux series that I already had. I do the refresh of it every now and then, but it's all in one video. It's like an hour and 58 minutes long. I got time codes in there, so you don't have to actually watch the whole thing, but it's pretty much everything you'd want to know about installing Arch Linux, from like the command line, building it all the way to GNOME or XFCE or Mate or Plasma, all in one video. And I'm usually wrong when I predict this kind of thing, but I think this one's going to be a big video because people seem to really like Arch Linux, and I'm not sure if anything like this exists yet. I guess I'll find out on Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm glad. Hopefully it will be good, or a popular one.
I just hope it's helpful for people because I know a lot of people might struggle with the installation. So I rehearsed this install process. I don't even know how many times. I basically had a VM and I installed Arch, wrote down all the steps. I tore it down, rebuilt it, and did it again and again and again and again. I literally have been working on this video for a month. I started at the beginning of this month and it's just now finished. So I hope it's a good one. I hope it helps people get it installed. So if anyone listening is curious about setting up Arch Linux, check my channel, learnlinux.tv, on Wednesday, and you should expect to find a video on there about that.
Cool.
And for those listening, it's February 28th, and it's actually Sunday we're recording. So that's Wednesday. That would be March 3rd, I believe.
Yeah. Yep. March 3rd. Yep.
Okay, I'm math right.
Forgetting that people aren't listening in real time. Not that I do live streams all that often, but speaking of which, I'm not going to give it away in this video. I think Tom knows what I'm talking about, but pay attention to Tom's channel and my channel on Wednesday. I'm not going to say what it is, but I think people will like it.
We're working on stuff.
We're doing a thing.
Cool.
But
that's a lot. Yeah. But don't worry, we're trying to get this more regular, and we still do a lot in between. So there'll still be more to talk about, even if we make this more frequent, and which we're working on. It has been a calamity of errors every time we try to get together. It turns out coordinating 3 people, even though everyone's sheltering in place to some extent, is still kind of challenging.
Yeah, in my case, I feel like, obviously this is a horrible situation nowadays for a lot of people, and a lot of people have it worse than I do. But I guess if if I complain about working more hours than I used to, I guess that's not really something to complain about, but that just kind of seems to be the case for me and a lot of people that I know of that, they don't commute because, sheltering in place, they're working from home, so they might get more things done. Maybe they have a hard time, like I do, stopping working and switching to home mode, whatever it is. But yeah, it can be kind of challenging.
Oh yeah. And just, figuring out timings of everything else. I never complain. I kind of joke that my life is just some weird collection of first world problems, and I'm aware enough of them so I never complain about them.
So Tom, you brought up having a browser tab that you don't have with you, that's on a different computer. It kind of reminded me of an idea I had, or something I wish existed, but I don't think it does. And either this is a very stupid idea, or maybe it's brilliant. I have no idea. For those, so about sync thing, obviously, if you want to sync your files from your laptop or your desktop back and forth, you can make sure maybe a directory in your home directory, maybe your documents directory on your laptop is the exact same as that on your other computer. And you delete a file from one, it's deleted from the other, you add a file, it's added to the other, full synchronization 2 ways. Sometimes I wish that we had true browser sync. And yes, we have browser sync. Every browser has this. You sign in unless it's Chromium because they're taking that away from us. But you have Firefox, Google Chrome. You could see a list of tabs that's open on your other computer. But that to me doesn't imply syncing. I wish that we had syncing so good that if I opened a tab on my laptop, that same tab would open on my desktop. And if I closed it on my desktop, it would actually also close it on my laptop. So we had sync to the point where no matter what computer you're using, you do one on one, it's done to the other as far as what tabs you have open. I know that could be very challenging, but
it does
really
exist.
Wish that exists. It does it. How?
Yeah. It's not native to the browsers, and I do not know the name of it, but there's even a way, because I started looking at this a while ago, but then I kind of got sidetracked. One of my friends had showed me a plugin that does something similar where it can see all the other tabs open and actually create a sync between all the tabs open, where you have to tell it to do so, but it could remember all the tabs and reopen them in the same way, but then it had a way of syncing it as a plugin. The name of the plugin eludes me, because there used to be, before Firefox integrated it years and years ago, there was a tool that had the syncing feature. And it was, I don't remember the name of that tool now. It was a cool tool, and I actually paid for it, which was a shame because the company was pretty angry when all the companies started integrating the syncing. They're like, oh, great, now you just torpedoed our business, so to speak, because we actually made a living off syncing browsers, because 10 years ago, maybe it wasn't really a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they also had something like there's some, if you look around, there are some plugins like that. I'm just so hesitant on loading plugins into my browsers because they represent such a potential security risk right now, because so much of what we do in security happens in the browser. And there's been a series of security issues where, a popular product, a popular plugin that was free, the person stops developing the project, or someone makes an offer of money on it. And then that gets hijacked and becomes a potential leak of information, or even worse, a collector of information for nefarious reasons because of a plugin support. So I've been hesitant to look for more plugins, but you're right. I really wish it was deeply integrated into the browser, because if they had tab sync, that would be wonderful. I have my work computer and I have my home computer, and the pinned tabs are not the same on both.
That's true. I think the closest thing I've seen that actually exists built into a browser is in iOS. So as an aside, I use an iPhone, I have an iPad. The reason why is because, well, I'm not really a phone person. I don't care for mobile phones. It's just not my thing. I feel like phones are a means to an end. I'm not excited about them. Because sometimes I get the reaction, what do you mean you don't use Android? Well, I don't even want a cell phone at all, to be honest. So I'll just stick with the iPhone just because it's slightly less crashy than Android. But anyway, what I've noticed on iOS is that if you open up Safari, which has virtually no features at all, but it has this one, you could look at the tabs that are open on your other device, and you could literally close a tab that's open on that device from the other device. That's not going to do a full two-way sync, but you can literally look at the list of tabs. Oh, I'm going to pick up that tab on this device, and then you can literally just X out of it on the other device, which I wish Firefox and Chrome had that built in, because that would get me almost there. It's still manual, but I feel like we're missing some quality of life improvements in browsers that we could really be benefiting from nowadays.
Yeah, well, maybe they'll get there with them.
Maybe there's like a really awesome developer listening to this podcast, and I just gave them an idea to go ahead and develop it, and you can have it. But no, it's just an aside. I thought I'd get your opinions on that, because I just feel like if that existed, it would make our lives easier, especially when you have multiple computers and you can't really remember which one you happen to open a specific website on.
You know, my workflow is more of I browse and do a couple things and then close out of it when I'm done. So it wouldn't really help me a whole lot, other than maybe if it was syncing my history. But I agree with Tom. I have seen a plugin that does this. But then you got to think about what the thing is. You have to think about is what does it use to do the sync? You know, and then what servers is your data going through to sync that back and forth? So I agree. I like your original idea of having something like SyncThing or some other syncing system that you can control. That would be more ideal than relying on a plugin or a third party to do the syncing for you.
Yeah, I agree. The security thing is a big concern. Another project I'm going to consider working on, if all goes to plan, I'll be able to talk about it next time. But I get a little annoyed that browsers have free reign on your RAM. So if they want 20 gigs of your memory, they're just going to use it if it's there. They're just going to use it until swap starts happening. And you could probably set memory limits on some browsers. And I'm pretty sure I did hear that in at least one, if not a few, you could actually set a memory ceiling. But I don't think you can do that in Firefox and Chrome unless I'm wrong. But what I thought about doing was looking into just containerizing Firefox. And I'm not the first one to do this. A lot of other people have done this. But I was inspired by this idea from Jeremy from System 76, who has I guess he has a really powerful computer with a lot of RAM. And he was just saying, yeah, a lot of my CPU cores and memory is just being saturated by my browser, and it's just happily consuming resources, whatever it wants. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to see how it works in containers. And when I first tried this years ago, it was a train wreck. It didn't work very well at all. And I almost wonder now, if I created a container and said, okay, this container's ceiling is 4 gigs of RAM or 6 or 8 or whatever, it just can't have more than that, because it'd be the same as running on a computer that only had that much memory. And if I say, oh, it's only able to have 4 cores, then it could want more cores. It could want more memory. It's not going to get it. And kind of containerizing it there might just be a fun thing. When I tried it before, the challenge was video acceleration and audio syncing. I would have audio that didn't match the lips if I was watching something in YouTube, and then it would stutter because it doesn't have the hardware acceleration, which can also be kind of difficult if you have an NVIDIA card, because you'll handle it differently there than you would if you had an Intel card. So that was probably 3 or 4 years ago. So I figured I'm going to look into this again. Maybe the landscape has changed since then. And maybe that might be just a good idea, just to keep browsers in check and not have free access to whatever it wants.
Yeah.
Might be a fun experiment, or it might be a complete disaster. I guess we're about to find out. Or not. If I don't mention it, just again, you could assume that it was not a good experience.
That's a lot.
That was a lot.
Plenty more to do, which means by the next time we record this, we'll be plenty more to talk about.
But the benefit there is hopefully we won't have so much to catch up on, because we'll hopefully meet up sooner and not have, oh, by the way, in the past however long it's been, I've been doing this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right then. Well, this was, did we come up with a better show title?
Projects. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we'll still call it the first reboot then, because it's the first one after the reboot.
All right.
If something
go.
pops in my head before then, or we'll throw it in the chat. So you've been listening to episode 326 of the Sunday Morning Linux Review. This is Tom Lawrence, and then we have Tony.
Tony Bemis.
Jay LaCroix.
All right. And thank you for joining us. I think we still have a few listeners, right? So leave us some feedback. Let us know what you think. Throw some suggestions at us a little bit. But we're going to try and stick with this new format and skipping the news because, we just want to talk about Linux and projects. And I think that's really what we're about here. So thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.